The sun was already high in the sky when João Batista, a simple and hard-working man, adjusted the straw hat on his head and looked out at the horizon. The dust lifted by the wind seemed like a reminder of everything he had faced in life. Days of toil in the fields, cold nights under the roof of a humble house, and the constant judgment of people who measured his worth only by the worn clothes he wore. But João knew something had changed. He was no longer just the farmer, struggling to pay the bills without anyone knowing. Luck had knocked on his door at the turn of the year. The billion-dollar jackpot from the Mega Sena lottery was now in his hands. Even so, he chose to keep it a secret. For João, money didn't change who he was. He remained a man of principles, driven by dreams and the will to succeed. On that day, however, he decided to take a step forward. With a heart full of hope, he took his old car and set off toward a place that had occupied his thoughts for years, a luxurious horse ranch that was for sale in the region. He had always dreamed of breeding horses, but upon arriving there, he didn't know he was about to live one of the most humiliating experiences of his life. Little did João know that in just a few hours, those who scorned him for his simple clothes would have the biggest shock of their lives. And he, with the serenity of someone who knows their worth, would teach them a lesson they would never forget. João Batista was a man who carried the weight of a life of hard work, but also the lightness of dreams he never let die. Born to humble farmers, he grew up among crops and animals, learning early on that the land only gives fruit to those who treat it with respect and dedication. Despite living with little, João was grateful for what he had, but deep down, his heart longed for something greater. His love for horses was born in childhood. He fondly remembered the times he watched from afar the larger farms in the region where horses ran free and majestic through the pastures. One day, I'll have a place like this, he promised himself. But the dream seemed distant, almost unattainable. Breeding horses and maintaining a ranch was something for the wealthy, and João had just enough to get by. Life went on, marked by scorching sunrises and full moons illuminating the fields. João never stopped working hard. He believed life could only be lived with honesty and determination. When the Mega Sena da Virada lottery appeared on TV, as it did every year, he didn't pay much attention at first. These things never happen to people like me, he thought. But something that night made him change his mind. At a friend's insistence, João decided to buy a ticket. He chose a combination of numbers that held special meaning for him: the birthdays of his parents, the date he planted his first crop, and the number of years since he had made that childhood promise. He left the ticket on the kitchen table and almost forgot about it. When the numbers were drawn on New Year's Eve, João couldn't believe his eyes. He checked the numbers 1, 2, 3 times. It was true. He was the sole winner of a billion-dollar prize. Emotion overwhelmed him, but instead of shouting it to the world, João decided to keep the news a secret. He wanted to think calmly about what he would do with the fortune. Money only serves to help achieve dreams and do good, he murmured to himself, looking at the starry sky. Without fanfare, João went to the bank, collected the prize, and secured the money. Slowly, he began planning what to do next. His plan was simple: buy a ranch and begin the dream he had carried for so many years. He searched for properties for sale, and after a few weeks, found the perfect place: a luxurious ranch with modern facilities and large pastures, ideal for the horses he had always dreamed of breeding. That day, João woke up earlier than usual, dressed in his best clothes, which were still simple and marked by time, and got into his old car. He didn't need luxury to know who he was. He took the address of the ranch and left, anxious and hopeful. While driving along the dirt roads, João couldn't imagine what awaited him. He was about to discover that, for many, appearances still mattered more than character, and that to achieve his dreams, he would have to face something harder than the harshness of fieldwork, the prejudice of those who couldn't see beyond a farmer's simple clothing. When João arrived at the ranch, the grandeur of the place took him by surprise. The facilities were impressive, with immaculate stables and vast pastures where horses moved elegantly. The place seemed like a distant dream, but it was within his reach. His heart beat faster, not just with the excitement of seeing his dream so close, but also with the feeling that somehow he still didn't belong there. He parked his simple, old car and was soon approached by a man in a dark suit, who came over with the rigid posture of someone used to dealing with big business. The man quickly looked João up and down. The worn checkered shirt, slightly faded jeans, and well-used boots didn't go unnoticed. "Can I help you, sir?" the man asked, raising an eyebrow slightly as if he already knew the answer. João smiled, trying to hide his hesitation. "I came to inquire about the ranch for sale," he replied firmly but without arrogance. The man looked him over again, once more assessing him as if trying to figure out what someone like him could be doing in a place like this. He made a vague gesture with his hand, inviting João to follow him. "Of course, but just to be clear, the price is considerable. We're not talking about a simple rural property here. The value is quite high." João, already aware of the steep price, simply nodded and followed the man, who introduced himself as Carlos, the ranch manager. With every step they took through the ranch, the manager grew colder and more distant, as if he were only there to fulfill a duty. While João marveled at the horses and the facilities, Carlos seemed increasingly impatient, barely hiding his irritation at each simple comment the farmer made about the place. "Do you really understand what you're saying?" Carlos asked with a cynical smile, as João admired the purebred horses. "These animals aren't like the ones you must have on your farm. They're not simple workhorses. They have pedigree, a high value. I'm not sure you're ready for this." João felt the weight of the words but remained calm. He wasn't there to prove anything to anyone, only to achieve the dream he had longed for. Still, with each passing moment, he felt more uncomfortable, as if everyone around him was mocking his presence. The manager, with his superior demeanor, always seemed one step ahead, as if João was an intrusion, someone who didn't even deserve to be there. As they passed by a group of employees at the ranch, João noticed that he wasn't just being watched, but also judged. The group, made up of well-dressed men and women, exchanged glances and smirks, whispering comments low enough to be discreet, but loud enough for João to hear. The words that reached João's ears left no room for doubt. "I think he's lost. Doesn't look like someone who can afford a place like this," said one, their tone dripping with disdain. "I bet he's just here to take some photos," another chimed in. "People like that don't understand what it takes to run a place like this. They don't know the work or beauty behind it." João, who had faced judgment his entire life as a simple farmer, tried to stay firm. He was there to fulfill his dream, not to win anyone's approval. But the words of Carlos and the others, coupled with their muffled laughter, began to eat away at his patience. It wasn't the first time he had been dismissed as a simple man, ignored because of his modest appearance. But this time, he was so close to achieving his goal that the humiliation he endured only made him more determined to own this place. When they arrived at the ranch's main office, Carlos led João to a table where the sale documents were laid out. The manager made sure to emphasize the steep price of the property, as though trying to intimidate João. Yet João, his expression steady and calm, asked to see the papers. Carlos, growing impatient, once again stressed the high cost of the ranch. "This isn't for everyone, sir. We deal with serious business people here, people who understand what it takes to manage a property like this. Frankly, I'm not sure you're ready for it." The words, now tinged with blatant disdain, hit João like stones. It wasn't just the humiliation that hurt. It was the way people judged his life, his clothes, and even his ability to dream. But before anger could take hold of him, João took a deep breath. His dream was closer than ever, and though this was a difficult test, he wouldn't let it shake him. At the end of the visit, when Carlos dismissed him with a smirk, João felt a mix of sadness and determination. He knew appearances were deceiving, and that life wasn't about expensive clothes or showy displays. What Carlos and the others didn't realize, however, was that this humiliation would be the last João would ever face. Soon, everyone would regret doubting him. What once seemed like a distant dream was now within his grasp, and João was sure he would prove to everyone that a man's worth isn't in his clothes, but in his courage to follow his dreams. Without saying much, João left the office, his thoughts racing as he returned to his car. He sat behind the wheel, looking out at the fields, as if recalling everything he had endured to get to this point. Every piece of land he had cultivated, every horse he had fed with his own hands, every sleepless night spent planning his future. It all seemed so far away now, but the humiliation he felt at that moment hung over him like a heavy shadow that refused to lift. Carlos, the manager, seemed to have dismissed João entirely, engrossed in his own thoughts as he shuffled through the papers on the desk. It was as if he expected João to ask for a discount or simply leave, convinced he wasn't up to the task. Every word Carlos uttered, every disdainful look he cast, only fueled João's quiet indignation. He could feel the weight of their judgment pressing down on his shoulders, the burden of all the expectations he had failed to meet in their eyes. And it hurt more than he cared to admit. "Do you have any further questions about the property?" Carlos asked, his tone laced with impatience. Up until that moment, João had done his best to remain calm, but he felt a rising warmth in his chest. It was as if all the ironic words, muffled laughter, and scornful glances he had endured were finally reaching a breaking point, demanding a response. He knew he had been holding back, but now it was time to speak the truth, not out of pride or revenge, but because he no longer wanted to hide behind silence. He wanted to be seen for who he truly was. With a calmness that surprised even himself, João opened the folder by his side and pulled out an envelope, handling it with the care of someone holding a sacred secret. Without saying a word, he placed the envelope on the table in front of Carlos, who stared at it in confusion. "What's this?" Carlos asked, his curiosity barely masking the sarcastic tone in his voice. He thought he knew what was happening, but couldn't believe what was about to unfold. João looked Carlos straight in the eye, unwavering, and replied firmly, "This is my prize. I am the winner of the Mega Sena da Virada." Carlos's reaction to those words was one João didn't expect. The manager froze, staring at the envelope as if trying to process the information but failing to believe it. He picked up the lottery ticket inside, scrutinizing it closely. The words didn't seem to make sense to him, not until the numbers finally clicked in his mind. And then reality hit him like a punch to the stomach. This is impossible," Carlos stammered, his voice trembling, his eyes wide as he stared at João. He searched for some logical explanation for what he had just heard, but there was none. João, in his simple clothes, with his calloused hands and humble gaze, was the winner of a fortune that would change his life forever. That same farmer who had been ridiculed and judged by everyone now stood before Carlos with the means to buy the ranch of his dreams. And Carlos, the once arrogant manager, finally understood the magnitude of his mistake. The silence that followed was deafening. João leaned back in his chair, unhurried, letting the tension in the air speak for itself. He didn't need to yell. He didn't need revenge. The truth alone spoke louder than any words he could say. Carlos eventually composed himself, but his face was marked by embarrassment. Running a hand through his hair, he tried to find something to say, but the words eluded him. I didn't know," he began, his voice now shaky. "I had no idea." João looked at him with a profound calmness, almost as if he could see beyond the man's arrogance. He knew the situation had already gotten out of control. The surprise and regret were evident in Carlos's eyes, but João didn't want to dwell on it. He wasn't there to humiliate anyone. He was there to realize a dream. "Don't worry," João said, his voice gentle but authoritative. "This happens often. People judge what they don't understand. But what matters is that life is about choices. You chose to judge me by my appearance. I chose to live my dream." And so João's journey reminds us all that the true measure of a person isn't found in their appearance or wealth, but in their determination, integrity, and dreams. He taught a lesson that will echo far beyond the fields and ranches, a lesson about resilience, humility, and the power of believing in oneself.